Ethan had always trusted Sophie, believed that after 3 years together, nothing could shake the foundation they had built. But that night, everything changed the moment she stood in the doorway with her bag and said she had to stay over at her ex-boyfriend Jake's place because he was emotionally falling apart. The way her voice trembled didn't sound like concern. It sounded like guilt. As the door closed behind her, the silence inside the apartment felt heavier than ever, pressing on Ethan's chest like a warning he could no longer ignore. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. And the more he replayed her words in his mind, the more they twisted into something darker, something that tasted like betrayal. That was the moment Ethan realized he wasn't going to wait for the truth to come to him. He was going to uncover it himself. And whatever he found would change everything. Sophie left the apartment with a rushed goodbye, barely giving Ethan time to process her explanation. She insisted that Jake was in the middle of a personal crisis, claiming his father had suddenly fallen gravely ill, and she was the only person he trusted enough to lean on. The story sounded fragile the moment it came out of her mouth, but Ethan didn't react. He simply nodded, watching her disappear down the hallway, while a cold heaviness pooled in his stomach. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door, listening to the fading echo of her footsteps. Something inside him shifted. A quiet snap. A warning that he had ignored too many times before. He walked into the living room and sat down, trying to calm the storm building inside his chest. But the more he tried to rationalize her behavior, the more the inconsistencies stood out. Why would Jake call Sophie instead of his own family? Why would Sophie immediately drop everything and rush to him when she hadn't spoken to him in months, or so she'd claimed? And most importantly, why did she look away every time Ethan asked about Jake in the past? He pulled out his phone. His hands weren't shaking, but his breath was. He didn't want to be the kind of person who checked up on his partner, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like standing in a burning house, pretending not to smell smoke. Ethan searched for Jake's father on social media, expecting nothing, but within seconds, he found a post. The man had been at a barbecue earlier that day, smiling, holding a plate piled with food, clearly healthy and far from a hospital bed. Ethan stared at the screen, the truth settling like a heavy stone in his chest. She lied. Not a small lie. A lie crafted with intention, urgency, and emotional manipulation. And if she lied about this, what else had she lied about? He stood up slowly, feeling an eerie calm take over his body. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was clarity. He walked into the bedroom they shared and looked around. Her clothes in the closet. Her makeup on the dresser. Her books stacked on the nightstand he'd bought her for Christmas. Every trace of her suddenly felt foreign, like they belonged to a stranger who had been living in his home under false pretenses. Ethan grabbed his phone again and called a 24/7 moving service. A man answered groggily, irritated before even hearing the request. But when Ethan explained he needed everything belonging to Sophie packed and moved immediately, the man paused, then agreed. Within the hour, a team showed up at the apartment. Ethan directed them quietly, pointing at each item without a word of hesitation. Box after box filled with Sophie's belongings. 17 boxes in total. When they asked for the delivery address, Ethan gave them Jake. The same place Sophie had chosen to spend the night. He didn't leave a note. He didn't send a text. He simply watched the boxes disappear out the door, feeling the weight of betrayal finally lift from his shoulders. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something close to peace. Morning came with an unsettling quiet, the kind that makes every sound feel louder than it should. Ethan woke up earlier than usual, not because he slept well, but because his mind hadn't stopped racing all night. He walked to the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee, and stared out the window as the world slowly came alive outside. Meanwhile, across the city, chaos was unfolding. The moving truck pulled up in front of Jake's house just as the sun was rising, and the workers began unloading the 17 boxes onto the porch. Jake opened the door in confusion, hair messy, eyes half open, wearing the expression of someone who had no idea why a moving crew had shown up at dawn. Sophie rushed out behind him, still in the clothes she'd worn the night before, and the moment she saw the labeled boxes, her face drained of color. She grabbed one of the workers by the arm, demanding to know who ordered the delivery. He simply pointed to the paperwork with her name, her address, and the signature confirming the pickup. Her panic rose immediately. She called Ethan. No answer. She called again. Still nothing. Her frustration turned into frantic shouting. The kind neighbors pretended not to hear, but secretly watched from behind curtains. Jake tried to calm her down, but even he looked mortified by the spectacle happening on his doorstep. Finally, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, saw Sophie's name, and let it ring. He didn't owe her a conversation. Not after the lie. Not after the betrayal. After several missed calls, Sophie sent a long, desperate message, demanding an explanation and insisting everything was a misunderstanding. Ethan read the first line, then deleted it without replying. Instead, he typed one simple sentence. You chose where to stay. Now your things are there. He put his phone face down on the counter and continued drinking his coffee in silence, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and clarity wash over him. Across town, Sophie read the message aloud, her voice cracking with disbelief. Jake stood beside her, arms crossed, unsure whether to comfort her or quietly judge her. The boxes kept piling up. A stack of clothes. Books. Shoes. Personal items she never imagined would show up here, of all places. The reality of the situation hit her in waves. She tried calling again, but this time Ethan blocked her number. The workers finished the delivery, handed Jake the final form, and drove away, leaving the mess behind. Sophie sank to the porch steps, covering her face with her hands. This was no longer a misunderstanding she could spin into an excuse. This was a consequence. Jake muttered something under his breath, clearly annoyed at being dragged into her drama. Sophie felt the first real pang of fear that everything she had tried to hide was unraveling much faster than she could control. Back in Ethan's apartment, the space felt lighter without her things. He walked through each room slowly, absorbing the unfamiliar sense of freedom. When his phone lit up with a message from a mutual friend asking what happened, Ethan responded with the truth, clean and simple. No embellishment. No anger. Just facts. And as he sent it, he felt the weight on his chest finally loosen, replaced with a quiet certainty that he had done the right thing. The morning that started with chaos for Sophie became the morning Ethan reclaimed his peace. Sophie spent the rest of the morning packing around Jake's living room, rage and panic twisting her face in equal measure. She kept insisting that Ethan had overreacted, but even Jake was beginning to realize that this situation was bigger than she wanted to admit. The more she tried to defend herself, the less sense her explanations made. She claimed she only stayed over because Jake needed emotional support, yet she refused to explain why she lied about his father being hospitalized. Every time Jake asked for clarity, she snapped back with irritation, shifting blame onto Ethan as if he were the one who had done something wrong. By noon, Sophie had reached out to almost everyone she knew. She called friends, hoping someone would take her side. But word travels fast, and Ethan's quiet explanation, clear, calm, and backed by evidence, had already reached most of them. Screenshots of her selfie in Jake's bathroom had surfaced, sent by a mutual friend who had always suspected something was going on. Sophie tried to deny it at first, claiming it was an old photo, but the timestamp was right there. There was no escape. Then came the messages from her own family. Her sister texted her asking why she had lied to their mother about spending the evening with a friend. Her father left a voicemail, not angry, just disappointed, asking her to come clean and stop dragging people into her lies. Hearing his voice cracked something inside her, but instead of admitting fault, Sophie spiraled deeper into defensiveness. She shifted into desperation, sending Ethan long paragraphs insisting she had never meant to hurt him, followed by short, angry bursts accusing him of being cold and heartless for moving her things out. Ethan saw the messages appear in his blocked folder, but didn't open any of them. He didn't need to. The truth had already spoken for itself. Meanwhile, Sophie's attempts to rewrite the story only made things worse. She tried telling friends that she had stayed at Jake, on the couch, but the bathroom selfie ruined that narrative instantly. She tried claiming Ethan had been controlling, but their mutual friends knew Ethan too well to believe that. The harder she tried to manipulate the situation, the more transparently the lies showed through. Even Jake's patience began to run thin. He didn't like being dragged into drama that wasn't his. And he especially didn't like people thinking he was still entangled romantically with Sophie. By late afternoon, he had stepped outside to take a phone call from his girlfriend Teresa, his voice shaky and frantic as he tried to explain the chaos in the least incriminating way possible. Sophie overheard bits of the conversation and felt her stomach drop. Her actions weren't just destroying her reputation, they were about to explode Jake's life too. She sat on the floor among the scattered boxes, her head in her hands, as the weight of everything she had set in motion finally crashed down on her. For the first time, she realized that the walls weren't closing in because of Ethan's decision. They were collapsing under the weight of her own lies. Teresa returned earlier than expected, pulling into the driveway just as Jake was trying to compose himself after the phone call. She stepped out of her car with a grocery bag in hand, expecting a quiet morning with her boyfriend. What she walked into instead was the sight of 17 boxes stacked across the porch and Sophie standing in the doorway looking like she'd been caught stealing something. Teresa froze, her eyes narrowing immediately. She didn't say a word at first. She just stared at Sophie, then at Jake, then back at the boxes, piecing the situation together with an unsettling calm. Jake opened his mouth to explain, but Teresa had already pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen and held it up, showing them the footage from her security camera. The timestamp was from the night before. Sophie entering the house. Sophie making herself comfortable. Sophie walking down the hallway that led directly toward Jake's bedroom. The look on Teresa's face was beyond anger. It was the kind of hurt that turns into cold, sharp resolve. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply said, "Both of you, out now." Jake tried to reach for her arm, stammering excuses, insisting nothing happened. But Teresa wasn't listening. She stepped inside just far enough to grab a small box of her belongings and then stood at the doorway, her voice shaking with controlled fury as she repeated the command. Jake hesitated, torn between begging and accepting defeat, until Teresa pointed at his bag hanging on the coat rack. That was the moment he realized she meant it. He grabbed the bag and stepped outside. Sophie, meanwhile, was scrambling to defend herself, tripping over her explanations, insisting she only stayed to help. But Teresa didn't spare her a glance. She pointed down the driveway. Sophie tried again, her voice cracking, but Teresa had already turned her back and locked the door behind her. The final click of the lock echoed, louder than any fight they could have had. Jake sank onto the steps, burying his face in his hands as reality hit him. Sophie stood beside him, humiliated, staring at the boxes like they were evidence of a crime she didn't remember committing. Within an hour, Teresa had arranged for someone to change the locks and told a neighbor to keep an eye on the house. She wasn't coming back until both of them were gone. With nowhere to go, Jake and Sophie moved the boxes to the lawn, hopping to sort out what belonged where. But the chaos only worsened. A few nosy neighbors wandered over, whispering about the drama unfolding in front of them. One even joked about calling a reality TV show. Sophie wanted to disappear. As they argued about where to put the boxes, an unexpected rain shower rolled in. Within minutes, several cardboard boxes collapsed, spilling clothes, books, and personal items across the wet grass. A few items went missing, either taken or ruined. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the unbearable truth. She had nowhere to stay, no ally to defend her, and no relationship left to shield her from the fallout. Jake blamed her. She blamed him. But deep down, both of them knew the mess they were standing in was a creation of their own choices. And Ethan, miles away, was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. Sophie spent the next several days moving from place to place, looking for anywhere she could sleep that wasn't soaked from the storm or scattered across Jake's lawn. Her phone stayed glued to her hand as she tried every method she knew to pull Ethan back into her orbit. She started with apology messages, long, emotional paragraphs about confusion, stress, and misunderstandings. When Ethan didn't respond, she switched tactics and tried guilt. She wrote that he had abandoned her in her darkest moment, that he was cruel for not hearing her side, and that she was afraid to be alone. Still nothing. That silence pushed her into a deeper panic she hadn't expected. She called mutual friends, hoping someone would relay her desperation to Ethan. But most of them had already chosen sides, and this time, they weren't choosing hers. Screenshots of Sophie's messages to Jake from months earlier leaked quietly through the friend group, revealing a pattern of flirting and emotional triangulation she had insisted never existed. Every attempt she made to justify herself only reinforced the truth, that she had been lying to everyone, including herself. By the third day, she shifted into a darker strategy, one she had used in the past without hesitation. She claimed Jake had become aggressive, that she had feared for her safety, and that she only stayed over because he pressured her. It was a lie crafted to provoke protective instincts, but this time, no one took the bait. People asked for proof, and when she couldn't provide any, the doubt in their voices became impossible to ignore. She reached out to one of Ethan's ex-girlfriends, hoping to manipulate sympathy by saying Ethan had emotionally abandoned her. But the ex shut her down quickly, telling her she needed to face the consequences of her own actions. Hearing that made Sophie feel exposed in a way she wasn't used to. The control she usually had over narratives was slipping out of her hands faster than she could grasp it. In a last-ditch attempt to regain stability, Sophie created a fundraiser online, claiming she had been kicked out unfairly and needed help finding a safe place to live. The story was full of half-truths and dramatic embellishments meant to pull at strangers' emotions. But the fundraiser didn't stay private for long. Someone recognized her name, connected the dots to the drama that had spread through her social circle, and shared the link with a comment calling it a scam. The backlash was immediate. People reported the page. Friends confronted her. Even distant acquaintances sent her messages telling her to stop lying. Sophie shut the fundraiser down within hours, but the damage was done. Her coworkers heard about it next. Whispers spread through the office, and soon HR scheduled a meeting with her about professional conduct and personal accountability. She left the meeting pale and shaking, unable to deny how quickly her life was collapsing. Meanwhile, Ethan stayed silent through all of it. His number remained blocked. His social media untouched. His friends and family refused to act as bridges for her desperation. The more she tried to claw her way back to the comfort she once had, the farther it slipped from reach. For the first time, Sophie couldn't outrun the consequences. For the first time, everyone around her saw the pattern clearly. And for the first time, she realized that the person she had underestimated the most, Ethan, was never coming back. Sophie's life unraveled faster than she could catch her breath. Every bridge she tried to rebuild collapsed the moment she touched it. At work, her supervisor called her in for a second meeting after more complaints surfaced about her attitude and unexplained absences. She tried to defend herself, but the words tangled together, sounding like excuses even to her own ears. By the end of the week, she was placed on a performance improvement plan, a thinly veiled warning that her job was hanging by a thread. Her social life didn't fare any better. Friends who once supported her now avoided her messages, tired of the lies and emotional manipulation. Some blocked her outright. Others confronted her directly, telling her they could no longer trust anything she said. What hurt most was when her own sister told her she needed to stop blaming everyone else and finally look in the mirror. The sting of those words followed her everywhere. With nowhere stable to stay, Sophie reluctantly turned to Jake, hoping he might offer her a temporary place to sleep. But Jake was no longer the calm, friendly comfort she remembered. The chaos from Teresa's discovery had pushed him into a downward spiral of his own. He was irritable, unpredictable, and easily angered. His financial issues surfaced quickly. Overdue bills stacked across the kitchen table, eviction notices shoved into drawers, and a constant tension that made the entire house feel like it was holding its breath. Sophie tried to ignore the warning signs, telling herself everything would settle down. But one night, during an argument over something as trivial as a misplaced charger, Jake's temper snapped. He slammed a chair into the wall, splintering it, and threw one of her soaked boxes out onto the porch. Sophie flinched at the sound, realizing too late that she had traded one disaster for another. The illusion that Jake had ever been a safe fallback shattered instantly. With fear creeping into her chest, she grabbed whatever belongings she could carry and left the house, wandering into the night with no clear destination. Over the next few days, her situation deteriorated even further. A rumor began spreading online, linking her name to the failed fundraiser. People accused her of fraud, calling her dishonest and manipulative. She tried reporting the posts, but more appeared in their place, each one painting her in a harsher light. The pressure became suffocating. She couldn't escape the consequences anymore. No one believed her. No one defended her. And no one cared about the explanations she once wielded like weapons. In the quiet moments, when she sat alone in borrowed rooms or on unfamiliar couches, the truth finally sank in. Everything she had lost, her relationship, her home, her friends, her reputation, had fallen apart not because people turned on her, but because she had built it all on lies. Ethan didn't destroy her life. Jake didn't ruin it either. She had done that herself, piece by piece, lie by lie, until there was nothing left to stand on. Meanwhile, Ethan continued forward, untouched by the chaos she left behind. He didn't speak about her. He didn't check in on her. He simply lived his life with a quiet peace that made her realize how much she had taken from him, and how little she had given in return. For Sophie, the collapse wasn't a single moment. It was a slow, brutal recognition. The understanding that consequences don't always arrive as storms. Sometimes they come as silence. Sometimes they come as distance. And sometimes they come as the painful truth that the life she once had was gone for good. Ethan moved on quietly, rebuilding his life one small step at a time. He spent weekends fixing up the room that once held Sophie's belongings, repainting the walls, clearing out old drawers, and replacing the lingering weight of the past with something lighter. He began seeing someone new, a woman who valued honesty and never made him question his own worth. Their relationship grew slowly, built on trust rather than fear, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt genuinely safe with another person. His friends noticed the change in him, a calm steadiness that came from finally letting go of the chaos he had tolerated for far too long. He set firmer boundaries in every area of his life, refusing to let anyone cross lines that once left him wounded. And whenever people asked about Sophie, he didn't speak with bitterness or anger. He simply said she made her choices, and he made his. One night, as he sat in his newly restored room, he allowed himself a final thought. He hadn't ruined her life. He had only stepped away, so she could face the world she created. And with that realization, he felt a sense of peace that marked the true beginning of his new chapter.